The night of September 4th, 1944, does not fall gently over the rolling fields of Belgium, but rather descends like a suffocating shroud of iron and velvet, heavily laden with the stench of cordite and the rotting sweetness of unharvested hay. In the vicinity of Sars-la-Bruyère, a tiny hamlet that would otherwise be nothing more than a footnote in a traveler's journal. The darkness is not empty, for it pulses with the mechanical heartbeat of the Wehrmacht, retreating in fury, and the nervous exhaustion of the American 1st Infantry Division, pushing forward with the desperate momentum of men who have seen too much war and simply want it to end. Among these men, digging into the wet Belgian earth, is Private First Class Gino Merli, a machine gunner with the 18th Infantry Regiment, who is about to endure a night that will strip him of his humanity and forge him into something elemental, something that exists in the gray space between the living and the dead. The Big Red One, as the division is known, has chased the German army across France, leaving a trail of broken tanks and shattered towns from the hedgerows of Normandy to the liberation of Paris. And now they stand on the threshold of the Reich itself. But the enemy is not broken. For a wounded animal is most dangerous when it is cornered, and the German rearguard is coiling to strike back with the venom of a dying empire. Private Merli is not a giant of a man, nor does he possess the physical imposingness of a propaganda poster hero. But he possesses something far more lethal, which is an intimate and terrifying relationship with the Browning M19-119A4 30 caliber light machine gun, a weapon that is less a tool and more an extension of his own nervous system. The position he occupies is precarious, a solitary island of resistance designated to cover the retreat of his platoon, because the commanders know that the Germans are coming in force, and someone has to stay behind to feed the beast of war so the others might live to fight another day. The instructions are simple and brutal. Hold the line until you cannot, and then hold it a little longer. As the sun dips below the horizon, bleeding crimson across the sky, the temperature drops, and the fog begins to rise from the damp earth, wrapping around the barrels of the guns and the legs of the tripods like cold, ghostly fingers. Merli and his assistant gunner check their ammunition belts, running their hands over the brass casings with the reverence of priests handling rosary beads, because they know that each round represents a fraction of a second of life bought in the currency of death. The silence of the evening is a lie, a deception practiced by the landscape before the violence erupts, and when it breaks, it does not break with a whimper, but with the apocalyptic shriek of mortar shells tearing through the canopy and turning the earth inside out. The ground shakes with a rhythmic violence that rattles the teeth in Merli's skull and sends shock waves traveling up his spine as the German infantry emerges from the gloom, not as individual soldiers, but as a gray tide of field, gray uniforms, and coal scuttle helmets, moving with the disciplined aggression of veterans who have survived the Eastern Front and have come west to kill Americans. Merli tightens his grip on the spade grips of the Browning, the Parkerized steel. Cold against his palms, and he squeezes the trigger, unleashing a rhythmic staccato bark that sounds like canvas, ripping as the muzzle flash illuminates the terrifying proximity of the enemy. The tracers paint lines of red fire into the darkness, reaching out to touch the oncoming shapes, and where they touch, men crumple like marionettes whose strings have been cut. But for every German that falls, two more seem to step from the shadows, their Mauser rifles flashing in reply, and the air around the foxhole becomes a swarm of angry bees, snapping and hissing as bullets tear through the dirt and air. The battle degrades rapidly from a tactical engagement into a primal brawl for survival, as the sheer weight of the German numbers begins to press against the thin American line, causing it to buckle and groan under the strain. Merli stays on the gun, traversing left and right, his eyes wide and burning from the smoke, his ears ringing with the concussive force of the explosions, trying to create a wall of lead that the enemy cannot pass. But the barrel of the Browning glows cherry red in the dark, a beacon for every German rifleman and grenadier in the sector. His assistant gunner works frantically beside him, feeding the hungry mechanism, keeping the belt straight, clearing jams with bloodied fingers until a burst of enemy fire finds him, and he slumps forward, his war over in a fraction of a second, leaving Merli alone in the hole with the smell of blood mixing with the hot oil of the gun. The loneliness that descends on him in that moment is absolute, a crushing weight that threatens to suffocate him because he realizes with a crystalline clarity that he is the last contracting muscle of the American defense in this field, and that the rest of the company has pulled back into the darkness, leaving him to hold back the tide with nothing but 30 pounds of steel and his own refusal to quit. The Germans are close now, so close that he can hear their shouts of command, guttural and harsh over the roar of the gunfire, and he can see the details of their equipment, the shimmer of sweat on their faces, the dull glint of bayonets in the moonlight. They are flanking him, moving around the sides of his position, sensing the weakness, trying to envelop the troublesome machine gun that has stalled their advance. And Merli realizes that he has run out of time and options. He fires a final long burst, sweeping the darkness in front of him, forcing the leading elements of the assault to dive for cover. And then, as the bolt slams home on an empty chamber, or perhaps simply to preserve what little ammunition remains, he makes a decision that is as desperate as it is terrifying. He releases the grips of the gun and slides down into the bottom of the foxhole, curling his body around the tripod, pulling his helmet low and willing his heart to stop beating so loudly against his ribs. He closes his eyes and goes limp, surrendering his body to gravity and playing the role of a corpse in a graveyard of his own making, waiting for the inevitable arrival of the enemy boots on the edge of his sanctuary. The arrival of the enemy is not marked by a sudden silence, but by the heavy thud of jackboots hitting the soft earth and the rustle of equipment as the German infantrymen overrun the position, their breathing heavy with exertion and adrenaline. Merli lies motionless, his face pressed into the dirt, the grit filling his mouth, his mind screaming at him to move, to run, to fight. But his will clamps down on his instincts, with a grip of iron forcing him to remain perfectly still, even as the shadows of the enemy fall across him. They are speaking German rapidly and excitedly, their voices full of the high-pitched energy of men who have survived a firefight and won, and they begin to secure the area, checking the foxholes for survivors or intelligence. Merli feels the vibration of their footsteps through the ground, feels the heat of their presence as they crowd around the lip of his hole, looking down at the American machine gunner, who appears to have been cut down at his post. This is the moment of the abyss, the point of no return, where a single twitch, a single gasp of breath, or the fluttering of an eyelid will result in a burst of MP-40 submachine gun fire that will turn him into the corpse he is pretending to be. Then comes the insult, the ultimate degradation that transforms the fear in Merli's gut into a cold, hard stone of hatred that will fuel him through the long night ahead. The German soldiers are not content to simply bypass the dead American, for they are victors in this small skirmish, and they wish to claim their spoils and verify their kill with the brutal pragmatism of the battlefield. One of the soldiers drops into the hole beside Merli, his boots scraping against Merli's legs, and the American soldier has to use every ounce of his mental strength to keep his muscles flaccid and unresponsive. The German kicks him roughly, rolling him slightly to the side to expose his flank, and then, with a laugh that sounds jarringly bright in the heavy darkness, he drives the point of his bayonet into Merlee's buttocks. The pain is a blinding white-hot spike that shoots directly into Merlee's nervous system, threatening to short-circuit his brain and force a scream from his throat, but he swallows the scream. He swallows the agony, and he remains as silent as the grave. The German withdraws the blade, and perhaps unsatisfied with the reaction, or simply cruel, he thrusts it again and again, stabbing the prone American soldier 4 times in total, probing for life, testing the meat to see if it flinches. It is a violation of the sanctity of the body, an intimate and grotesque torture that Merlee must endure without anesthesia and without defense, lying there like a piece of butchered livestock, while his enemy stands over him breathing his air. The physical pain is excruciating, but the psychological blow is heavier because it signifies that to these men, he is not a warrior worthy of respect, but merely an object, a discarded husk to be poked and prodded for amusement. Satisfied that the American is dead, the German soldier wipes his bayonet perhaps on Merlee's own uniform, and then turns his attention to looting the body, grabbing Merlee's wrist and tearing the watch from it, the metal band snapping under the force. They take his pistol, his personal items, rummaging through his pockets, with rough, greedy hands, taking the small tokens of his life, to trade for cigarettes or schnapps later in the rear echelon. They stand there for a moment, longer, looming over him, lighting cigarettes, the flare of the matches illuminating their faces, harsh and angular in the sudden light, and they laugh. They laugh at the dead American, at the ease of their victory, at the foolishness of this single machine gunner who thought he could stop the Wehrmacht. The smoke from their cigarettes drifts down into the hole, mixing with the smell of the blood that is now soaking into Merlee's trousers, and the laughter echoes in his ears, not as a human sound, but as the cackle of demons mocking his failure. They treat him as refuse, as a piece of debris on the tide of war, unworthy of a burial or a second thought, and in doing so, they make a fatal calculation. They assume that because the body does not move, the spirit has fled, and they assume that because they have taken his watch, they have taken his time. But they are wrong. They climb out of the hole, their voices fading as they move on to the next position, leaving Merlee alone. In the darkness, bleeding, humiliated, and stripped of his sidearm but still in possession of his machine gun and his life. As the footsteps recede into the distance, merging with the background noise of the battle that rages further down the line, Merlee opens his eyes. The pain in his back and legs is a throbbing, constant reminder of the violation he has just endured. But rather than debilitating him, it clarifies his purpose, focusing his mind like a lens, concentrating the rays of the sun. He is no longer just a soldier, defending a line. He is a revenant, a spirit returned from the underworld with a debt to collect, and the currency of that debt is lead. He waits, listening to the darkness, analyzing the sounds of the night, distinguishing between the wind in the trees and the movement of men, filtering out the distant artillery to focus on the immediate threats. He slowly, painfully shifts his body, testing his limbs, ensuring that the bayonet wounds have not severed any major tendons or arteries, and he finds that he can still move, he can still fight. He reaches out in the dark, his hands finding the cold, reassuring steel of the M19-19A4, dragging it back into position, checking the belt, ensuring that the mechanism is clear. The weapon itself, the Browning machine gun, is a marvel of industrial slaughter, a device designed with a singular purpose to project force over distance and deny ground to the enemy. It is a recoil-operated, air-cooled beast that fires the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, a round capable of punching through trees, brick walls, and human bodies with terrifying ease. It weighs 31 pounds without the tripod, and feeds from a cloth belt that dances and jumps as the gun devours ammunition, cycling at a rate of 400 to 600 rounds per minute. To the uninitiated, it is a clumsy, heavy piece of machinery, but to Merle, it is a precision instrument, a violin of violence that he knows how to play with virtuoso skill. He knows exactly how the bolt travels, how the extractor claws the round from the belt, how the firing pin strikes the primer, and he knows that in the hands of a determined man, it is capable of holding back a battalion. This is the heresy of Private Merle, the rejection of the binary logic of warfare that dictates that when a position is overrun, the defender must either surrender or die. He chooses a third path, a path of deception and ambush, transforming himself into a trap that resets itself after every kill. He understands now that the darkness is his ally, that the confusion of the battlefield is his camouflage, and that the Germans' arrogance is his greatest weapon. He is not fighting for territory anymore, nor is he fighting for the flag or for the division he is fighting, to reassert his existence, to prove to the men who laughed at him that he is still very much alive. He pulls the charging handle back, the metallic clack sounding thunderously loud in his own ears, but likely lost in the cacophony of the night, and he settles the stock against his shoulder, sighting down the barrel into the gloom. He waits with the patience of a stone, watching the shadows detach themselves from the tree line, watching the shapes of enemy soldiers moving confidently across the field, believing that the American line is broken and the way is open. They are walking tall weapons slung secure in the knowledge that the area has been cleared, that the dead American in the hole is rotting peacefully. Merle lets them come, lets them get close, closer than doctrine would dictate, letting them walk into the kill zone until he can hear their breathing, until he can smell the sweat and the leather of their gear. He is waiting for the perfect moment, the moment of maximum vulnerability, when they are fully exposed and have no cover to dive behind. He ignores the pain in his bleeding back, ignores the cold that seeps into his bones, ignores the terror that whispers in the back of his mind, telling him to stay down, to stay dead. He is analyzing the geometry of the ambush, calculating the sweep of the gun, the density of the target, grouping the likely avenues of escape. He knows that once he opens fire, the game changes, that he will reveal his position and bring the wrath of the entire German unit down upon his head. He knows that he cannot move, that he is tethered to this hole by the weight of the gun and the nature of his mission. There will be no retreat for him, no maneuvering to a secondary position. He is the anvil, and the Germans are the hammer, and he must withstand the blow. The sheer audacity of his plan is its own protection, for who would suspect that the corpse they just looted, the body they just desecrated, would rise up to smite them. The waiting is the hardest part, the time stretching out into infinity, each second an agony of anticipation. He watches a squad of Germans moving past his flank, silhouetted against the burning remnants of a farmhouse in the distance. They are relaxed, chatting softly, acting as if the war is miles away. Merle adjusts his aim, leading the lead soldier, slightly compensating for the movement, calculating the ballistics in his head by instinct and experience. He breathes in slow and deep, filling his lungs with the tainted air, steadying his heart rate, steadying his hands. He is a mechanic of death about to start his engine, and the machine gun is the piston that will drive the engine of destruction. He thinks of the bayonet entering his flesh, feels the phantom sensation of the steel sliding between his ribs, and he uses that memory to harden his resolve. He is not a victim. He is the predator. He is the thing that goes bump in the night. The heresy he commits is the heresy of hope, the belief that one man can alter the equation of a battle, that one man can stand against the tide and force it to break. He wraps his finger around the trigger, feeling the smooth curve of the metal, and he begins to apply pressure, taking up the slack, feeling the sear engage, ready to release the firing pin. The world narrows down to the sights of the gun and the gray shapes moving in the darkness. The abyss gazes into him, and he gazes back, and he does not blink. He is Gino Merli of the 18th Infantry, and he is about to introduce the Wehrmacht to the consequences of their laughter. The silence stretches to its breaking point, a rubber band pulled tight across the cosmos, and then, with a roar that shatters the night, Merli initiates the slaughter. The Browning's muzzle flash blinds the pitch, blackness a strobe light of violence revealing the frozen expressions of German soldiers caught in the open. They are unprepared for resurrection, believing the threat neutralized, and the gunner meet reacting for critical seconds, not as soldiers, but as men confronting a ghost. The bullets strike with the force of sledgehammers tearing through wool tunics and flesh punching men off their feet as the .30 caliber rounds chew through the squad with mechanical indifference. Merli traverses with savage precision, walking fire up and down the line, cutting down those who stand, and suppressing those diving for shallow cover. The deafening roar drowns out screams and the confusion of German officers unable to comprehend how a silenced position has erupted into a volcano of lead. This is the crucible where the plan moves from theory to execution, and the margin for error vanishes entirely. Merli fires until the belt runs dry, the cloth tail whipping through the feed tray, before reloading with hands slick with sweat and blood, his fingers finding the latch with muscle memory that bypasses conscious thought. He buys perhaps 30 seconds of confusion, hammering the tree line to keep the support elements down. But the Germans are veterans, and their shock quickly turns to a cold, professional fury. They return fire not with panicked shots, but with the coordinated volume of a unit maneuvering to kill, and the air around Merli's foxhole becomes a supersonic web of snapping bullets. Mortar shells fall closer, walking toward his position with terrifying accuracy, throwing up geysers of earth and shrapnel that rain down like hail on a tin roof. The concussions rattle his bones, threatening to collapse the foxhole, but he stays on the gun, firing short, controlled bursts to preserve ammunition and keep the barrel from melting. He sees shadowy shapes flitting from cover, tightening the noose, and knows he cannot hold them off forever against the sheer weight of numbers. Potato masher grenades tumble through the air, exploding with sharp cracks that send jagged iron tearing through the dark. One explodes near the lip, sending hot dirt into his face, blinding him momentarily, but he wipes his eyes and keeps firing, driven by a primal refusal to die. Inevitably, the wave crashes over him as the Germans surge forward with a roar of defiance. Bayonets fixed and submachine guns spraying wildly. Merli sees the gray wall of uniforms rushing him and knows the gun cannot cycle fast enough to kill them all. He fires until they are almost on top of him, until he sees the grit on their teeth, then performs the heresy for the second time. He drops from the gun, curling into the fetal position, pulling the lifeless weight of his assistant gunner over him to shield the living, and stops breathing. He goes limp, shutting down the engine of his body, switching off aggression to become an object, just as German boots land in the hole. The Germans are frantic adrenaline spiking shouting orders and kicking at the bodies, searching for the man who killed their comrades. They fire rounds into the dirt, smashing rifle butts against the tripod, looking down at Merli twisted and still amidst casings and blood. They prod him roughly angry kicks to the ribs, threatening to crack bone, but Merli accepts the pain as the price of admission. He absorbs the blows without a sound mind, detached, floating above the battlefield, watching with cold detachment. The Germans argue, pointing at the body confused, how a dead man fired so many rounds. But the battlefield logic dictates that things that do not move are dead. They push past the foxhole to continue their advance, and as their footsteps fade, Merli is left alone with the pain and silence. This psychological torture cuts deeper than bayonet wounds, the constant oscillation between reaper and corpse. It requires a schizophrenia of the soul to be a killer one moment and a carcass the next, switching off the survival instinct to lie perfectly still while enemies stand within arm's reach. He lies there for what feels like hours, listening to the battle, wondering if his unit is destroyed, or if he is the last American in Belgium. The blood from his buttocks soaks his trousers, pooling sticky in his boots as the chill seeps into his core, but he clamps his jaw shut, grinding molars until they ache. He waits until the enemy is comfortable setting up their own positions, then rises again. The pain is worse. Muscles stiffening, wounds throbbing, but he forces his body to obey, dragging himself to the gun. He checks the mechanism in the dark, finding the sturdy steel has survived the abuse. He racks the bolt, a metallic challenge, declaring the nightmare is not over. Locating the flashes of German rifles, he opens fire again. The shock is palpable, a terror transcending the physical, because to the Germans, it appears they are fighting a demon who rises from the dead repeatedly to exact vengeance. This cycle repeats throughout the agonizing night. The slaughter becomes a rhythm, a grotesque dance where Merli plays the music and the Germans pay the price. Each time they overrun him, he plays dead, enduring kicks, curses, and bayonets. Each time they leave, he rises and kills them from the rear. The Germans lose their nerve discipline fraying as they fight an enemy refusing to obey nature's laws. They fire wildly at shadows, wasting ammunition on phantoms, terrified that every pile of rags is waiting to shoot them in the back. Merli becomes a force multiplier, a single man creating the chaos of a platoon, sowing doubt into the heart of the enemy attack. The physical toll is catastrophic. Dehydrated lips cracked and bleeding bayonet wounds burning with infection, lightheaded from blood loss. He hallucinates seeing faces in muzzle flashes, hearing voices in the wind, but anchors himself to the cold reality of the steel. The machine gun barrel glows a dull, angry red sizzling when rain falls, requiring care not to sear his hands. He urinates in his pants, not from fear, but necessity, the warmth, a fleeting comfort. He strips away everything human, leaving only function, purpose, trigger, and target. As dawn approaches, the Germans mount one final desperate attempt to break the line, pooling infantry for a mass human wave charge. They scream a primal war cry, but Merli is beyond terror, operating on a plane where only ballistics matter. He fires his last belt, watching the ammunition feed, knowing that when gone, he is truly defenseless. The rounds tear into the leading ranks, breaking momentum and shattering cohesion. He fires until the bolt locks forward on an empty chamber, the metallic click signaling the end. He has no time to play dead. The Germans swarm, the whole faces twisted with hate. A soldier raises a rifle butt to smash Merli's skull, but before the blow lands, a voice cracks from the darkness behind. It is the flat, hard sound of an American rifleman. The counterattack has begun. Merli's defense bought time for the company to regroup and launch their assault. The Germans, caught between the hammer of reinforcements and the anvil of Merli's gun break and run, leaving their dead behind. Merli slumps over the gun, energy spent, body shutting down. He slides to the bottom of the foxhole, closing his eyes, listening to the beautiful profane music of soldiers securing the perimeter. He feels a hand shaking him gently and flinches, expecting a bayonet, but finds a young medic looking at him with horror and awe. The medic cuts away trousers, exposing the 4 ugly punctures, but Merli barely feels it, asking only for water. The sun rises over Belgium, revealing the cost. In front of Merli's position, the field is carpeted with war's detritus. The men of the 18th Infantry Regiment count the enemy dead, stopping at 52. 52 German soldiers lie in the arc of Merli's fire, silent testament to one man's lethality. They find blood in the foxhole shredded uniform and empty ammunition boxes scattered like brass confetti. They look at Merli sitting on a stretcher, smoking with trembling hands, and find no words to bridge the gap between the men who retreated and the man who stayed. The war does not end for Gino Merli that morning. He is patched up and eventually returns home, but the ghost of Sars La Bruyère follows. He is awarded the Medal of Honor, standing on the White House lawn, while the citation reads of gallantry and intrepidity. The words are grand, but cannot capture the smell of wet earth, the pain of the bayonet, or the sound of Germans laughing. He becomes a hero, a symbol of resilience, but inside remains the boy from Pennsylvania who played dead to stay alive. He lives a quiet life, serving his community, carrying memories with dignity. He does not brag, understanding that heroism is often a desperate necessity, chosen when all else is stripped away. He remembers the faces, the boots, the breath. He remembers the 52. Sometimes, in the quiet night, Gino Merli wakes, sweating heart, hammering, reaching for a machine gun. No longer there, waiting for the Germans to return, waiting for the laughter to stop, waiting for the dawn that saved his life. The corpse that woke up and slaughtered them lays down to rest, but the legend of the Reaper of Sars La Bruyère remains a reminder that even in the deepest abyss, a single spark of defiance can burn down the world.